The invisible weight of names. It may sound strange, but the name you carry can shape your path more than you expect. Not because a word has mystical power, but because it acts as a repeated social signal woven into everyday exchanges. Every email signature, every handshake, every introduction begins with it. That moment becomes the first impression others process, and psychologists note that small differences in pronounceability or familiarity often nudge how people respond to you. A name that feels easy to say or recall tends to fit more comfortably into memory, while one that requires extra effort may spark hesitation. It's not that names decide a life, they don't, but across hundreds of moments, those little hesitations can accumulate into meaningful differences. Research in psychology has observed what's called the pronounceability effect. People with names that are faster to process or easier to say often receive quicker recognition in areas like hiring or promotions. The finding doesn't mean talent or work ethic are less important. It shows how small perceptual biases slip into decision-making before skill even enters the conversation. Scholars still debate the strength of the effect and how much is cultural context versus bias, yet across repeated studies, the pattern appears consistently. Fluency influences preference. That means your name, like other cues, can tilt opportunity in ways that feel invisible while they're happening. Consider a hiring example. A recruiter scans through dozens of applications in a rush. Before they assess qualifications, the first detail they encounter is the name at the top. If one feels effortless to pronounce, it often gets processed without friction. Another name, equally valid, may slow the reader down with uncertain syllables. That micro delay isn't felt as negative, but the cognitive pause can push attention slightly away. Over time, when these moments repeat across decades, one applicant may receive more callbacks, not for being better, but for being easier to digest at a cognitive level. This subtle tendency doesn't dictate outcomes, but it layers weight quietly onto the scales of opportunity. The same mechanics show up outside the workplace. In networking contexts where dozens of introductions blur together, the names that can be repeated smoothly are usually the ones recalled later. If a coworker remembers your name without effort, they're more likely to bring it up again in conversation. This recall has little to do with competence. It reflects the brain's preference for shortcuts. Humans lean toward what costs less mental effort, which is why certain names circulate in memory and conversation more than others. It isn't prejudice in every case, but rather a cognitive preference for fluency. Dating research has uncovered similar biases. On platforms built around speed, people make decisions in seconds, scanning details in quick succession. Experiments show that names which feel easy or familiar to pronounce often receive more matches. Participants rarely articulate why they don't say, "This name feels smoother." Instead, the name gives a subtle edge in a process where milliseconds sway behavior. In both careers and relationships, the mechanics are the same. Not destiny, but nudges that influence outcomes when repeated often enough. The effect is easy to overlook until you apply it to a simple narrative. Picture two interns arriving at a software company on the same day. Both are equally qualified, both put in effort, both produce good work. One intern's name becomes second nature within a week. Everyone in the office uses it fluidly. The other intern's name stalls conversation as people hesitate or correct themselves. When managers later toss around ideas about new hires, which name rises to the top of their memory? It's usually the one spoken smoothly in meetings, in chatter, even in casual mentions at lunch. Over time, that difference in recall creates visibility, and visibility feeds opportunities. It's not fair, but it follows how minds operate. Recognition rides on fluency. Still, none of this means names control our futures. Influences stack in complex ways, and skills, networks, and persistence matter far more. Names are simply one variable in the larger web of cues that interact with human biases. Some names may initially add friction, but those same names can also become memorable with time and confidence. Many leaders and innovators carry names that were once considered difficult, and their uniqueness ultimately emphasized their presence. The point isn't to see names as doors that predetermine fate, it's to see them as levers that quietly influence interactions, levers we can understand and at times adjust. Practical strategies exist for those who have noticed their name becoming a hurdle. One simple tactic is to reduce friction in early introductions by pairing your name with a phonetic hint. Saying, "It rhymes with," or writing a brief pronunciation line in a digital bio quickly trains others while lowering social hesitation. Another effective move, suggested by professionals facing this barrier, is to add a short nickname in brackets to an email signature, while retaining the full name in formal contexts. Both methods keep identity intact, while lowering the barriers created by unfamiliarity. These minor microactions can make repeated interactions smoother, which weakens the effect of initial bias. Awareness works in both directions. it's just as important to notice how you respond to names as how others respond to yours. When you meet someone with a name you stumble over, the instinct is often to avoid saying it. That avoidance limits connection before it starts. Pausing to learn it, rehearse it, or even ask politely for guidance signals respect, but equally trains your brain to override its tendency toward ease. Small adjustments like slowing down to practice a name change how memory attaches. Over time, you not only reduce personal bias but contribute to a broader environment where effort and respect weigh more than shortcuts. Stepping back, the subject of names highlights a larger reality. We are constantly shaped by signals that seem trivial. Something as small as a syllable pattern can ripple through how opportunities are distributed. Scholars may continue to debate how strong the impacts are, but the value lies in admitting the presence of these influences at all. Names are not destiny, but they are nudges you can either ignore or account for. Recognizing them shifts the power dynamic from passively accepting outcomes to actively managing the context in which they unfold. The deeper lesson isn't limited to names. Any element of your environment, what people see, hear, or encounter first, can serve as a cue that shapes responses. Once you recognize that hidden levers like names exert influence, it becomes easier to question other surroundings that may also be exerting pressure. And some of the most striking examples of these subtle forces aren't linguistic at all but visual, built into the very colors around us. Colors that quietly control you. Why do so many gyms paint their walls in red, while fast food chains lean heavily on yellow? It isn't random or merely about style, it's deliberate psychology at work. Businesses test these colors because they tap into predictable emotional responses. A red gym wall doesn't just sit there, it stimulates your nervous system, lifting arousal and nudging you toward intensity. At a burger chain, yellow reinforces speed and appetite, making you more likely to eat quickly and order more than you planned. These cues feel backgrounded, but they guide behavior all the same. Psychological research, including findings highlighted in Adam Alter's work Drunk Tank Pink, shows consistent tendencies with color. Red often heightens alertness and in some cases even aggression, while blues and greens generally lower stress and promote calmer, more deliberate focus. Warm hues, reds, yellows, oranges, stimulate energy but also push people toward quicker, sometimes riskier choices. Cool tones encourage steadiness and restraint, helping people weigh options more slowly. These effects aren't rules etched in stone, but they represent nudges that influence how decisions feel in the moment. One striking example from the research involves a prison cell painted in what became known as Drunk Tank Pink. The color initially appeared to calm aggressive behavior, with measurable reductions in agitation, but follow-up studies showed the effect could rebound. After that early drop in tension, prolonged exposure sometimes rekindled frustration. The nuance here matters. Colors don't permanently lock behavior in place, but they shift baselines that then interact with time, mood, and context. It's a reminder that environments operate on probability, not certainty. These same mechanics unfold in everyday spaces. If you work in a brightly colored office dominated by reds or oranges, your nervous system operates in a slightly heightened state hour after hour. Everything feels more immediate, which can feed into quicker judgments, blunt emails written in impatience, snap decisions on projects, or commitments agreed to without thinking them through. Shift that space to softer blues or greens, and the baseline changes. You're less reactive, more inclined to pause before deciding. It doesn't mean color alone controls your behavior, but the backdrop tilts the balance point for your choices. This distinction becomes important when we mistake restlessness for dissatisfaction. Warm palettes encourage movement, novelty-seeking, and change. That might feel energizing during exercise or when you need momentum, but over long stretches it can create simmering impatience. Suddenly, a decision to quit a job or end a relationship feels less like careful reflection and more like an outlet for the background restlessness your environment has been amplifying. By contrast, the influence of cooler surrounds, like pale green or soft blue, encourages persistence. The same frustration may be reframed as temporary instead of terminal. Over time, these nudges accumulate, showing up in major life paths as quieter but real contributors. Evidence of color's impact even extends to attraction and social cues. In several experimental contexts, the color red has been linked to increased approach behavior. Participants often rate individuals as more attractive when associated with red, but this effect has limits. Researchers emphasize its sensitivity to cultural and situational context. What feels inviting in one setting may feel aggressive in another. Again, colors are influences, not universal switches. Even small accents matter. You don't need to repaint your entire office for color to exert influence. Research shows that brief exposure to brighter hues can restore energy after monotonous tasks. That's why small items, a yellow notebook, a green plant, or a subtly tinted lamp, can recharge mental focus and soften impulsivity in otherwise neutral environments. These tweaks highlight the practical side of color psychology. It isn't about extreme makeovers, but about modifying signals that your mind processes automatically. The larger issue is time and repetition. If choices are made day after day against a backdrop of heightened stimulation, the likelihood of impulsive decisions rises. Imagine an employee frustrated after a tense meeting, sitting in a red-toned office. Their elevated arousal amplifies urgency, and quitting may feel like the only rational action. The same employee in a cooler-toned environment would feel less pressed by immediate stress and more likely to step back and reconsider. Neither outcome is guaranteed, but the contrast shows how color steers reactions at critical moments. Across years, that tendency can shape careers, relationships, and major life paths indirectly. Zooming out, entire environments reflect the same logic. Urban areas saturated with gray or concrete tones frequently correlate with reports of restlessness and burnout. In contrast, residents surrounded by greenery, natural blues and greens in trees, plants, and water, report greater satisfaction and persistence in long-term goals. Again, these aren't absolute determinants, but they highlight how the emotional palette of a surrounding space subtly seeps into daily choices. When the full visual field leans toward calm or agitation, the emotional consequences follow. Recognizing color as a background force puts agency back in your hands. You can test its influence without massive effort. For example, before making a serious decision about work or relationships, add a cool tone element to your environment, a plant on the desk, a soft blue object in your line of sight. These additions can downshift arousal just enough to reduce impulsivity. It may not change the final decision, but it changes the quality of thinking you bring to it. Such micro-interventions are practical ways to manage the cues around you, instead of being managed by them. That's the key. Color doesn't decide your life, but it shapes the mental stage where choices play out. It influences your baseline level of reactivity and patience, tilting decisions one way or another without your awareness. Over long spans, those probabilities accumulate into patterns. Ignoring color treats it as mere decoration, but acknowledging it lets you take small, intentional steps to align your environment with the kind of thinking you want to encourage. And color is only one part of the puzzle. The deeper principle is that environments are filled with subtle architectures, spaces, layouts, and design choices that steer behavior even when we think we're unrelatedly deciding. Once you start noticing how those forces operate, questions naturally arise. Are our surroundings quietly shaping the stuckness we feel, not just in broad tones, but in the very way rooms and spaces are designed? That's where we turn next. The trap of environments you don't notice. Ever notice how one room in your home makes you restless, but stepping into another instantly calms you? That difference isn't random. The way a space is lit, how furniture is arranged, and even how objects are placed silently shapes what you do next. You don't sit and consciously analyze it. Your brain interprets these signals in the background, nudging you before you feel like a decision has even been made. That's the trap of environments you don't notice. The influence feels invisible, so you mistake environmental design for self-discipline or personality. Psychologists describe this as choice architecture. The term sounds technical, but the idea is straightforward. Physical layouts set default paths that people follow. Grocery stores are the classic example. Healthier items often sit in harder-to-reach areas, while cereals line up perfectly at eye level for children. Shoppers moving quickly aren't weighing fresh judgment each time, they're following the friction built into the shelves. The principle repeats everywhere. If your desk is closer to your phone than to your notebook, distraction wins. Over time, the setup's influence feels like part of who you are, when really it's the environment steering you. Researchers have also pointed out that we treat our surroundings like a local reservoir. Every time you face a choice, your immediate environment acts as a resource that biases the outcome. This doesn't mean the environment locks you into one path. It means certain behaviors are more convenient, so they repeat. The brain prefers easier routes, so those routes gradually harden into habits. Eventually, what started as design choices in a room or building looks like deeply ingrained personality traits. The same process plays out at scale. Studies in environmental psychology show that residents with regular access to green spaces report higher well-being and perform better on cognitive tasks than those living in areas dominated by concrete. City design isn't neutral. It installs default behaviors. A walkable park nearby makes residents more likely to stroll or exercise, while neighborhoods without that option funnel people toward cars and isolation. At first, the choice looks personal, but over years it's geography writing the habit. The environment doesn't announce its role, which is why people often blame themselves for outcomes it shaped. Workspaces magnify the effect. An office bathed in fluorescent light with uniform cubicles encourages withdrawal and routine. Creativity and openness are dampened, not necessarily because employees lack imagination, but because the space doesn't invite it. Research consistently finds that offices with natural light, flexible seating, and access to greenery support deeper focus and collaboration, even when the tasks are identical. The difference isn't willpower, it's what the design makes available. Left unchanged, those nudges can divert whole careers in subtle ways. Sometimes the influence is as simple as furniture orientation. Walk into a living room where every seat faces a television, and evenings quietly bend toward passive consumption. Shift the layout so seats angle toward one another, and conversation wins more often. Night after night, the repeated default becomes identity. People might laugh at the idea that a couch is shaping their lives, but a misplaced sofa can redirect hundreds of evenings without notice. The pattern repeats so consistently because the architecture is always there, nudging, even when motivation is. What makes these traps difficult is how quickly we stop noticing the space around us. A sterile office, a cluttered shelf, or a dark corner at home becomes part of the background. You assume your distraction or lack of energy is weakness, when in reality the setting is siphoning energy before you start. After months or years, the environment feels invisible, so self-blame becomes automatic. We forget to ask what the space is encouraging and what it's preventing. This is where a quick audit helps. Try a 60-second scan of your own setup. Look for 3 frictions that cost you mental bandwidth during a normal day. Is your desk in poor lighting that strains your focus? Are the tools you use most often stored in places that require constant reaching or searching? Do obvious distractions sit within arm's length? Write down the top 3. That micro-check reveals where your environment is nudging you in harmful directions before you've even made a conscious decision. It's simple, fast, and often eye-opening. Once you identify those frictions, the fixes don't need to be drastic. Moving a desk near a window adds natural energy that artificial light can't replace. Placing fruit in a bowl on the table while hiding snacks in a cabinet reshapes eating patterns by design, not willpower. Flipping a chair to face another person instead of a screen adds conversation without forcing effort. These adjustments may look small, but when multiplied by hundreds of daily cues, they stand between long-term drift and steady growth. The bigger point is that environmental influence isn't a theory, it's measurable. A worker spending hours commuting across a suburb returns home drained not because they lack drive, but because the geography etched extra fatigue into their day. A student in a dark dorm struggles longer with focus than a peer in a sunlit room, even if both commit similar effort. When these examples accumulate, they quietly shape entire life trajectories. The real trap is not recognizing it's happening and assuming discipline alone explains the outcome. So the smarter question is not, why am I unmotivated? But what repeat behaviors is this place structuring for me? Look around with that mindset. Does your house guide you toward passivity or engagement? Does your office produce collaboration or silence? Does your neighborhood create friction against activity or invite it naturally? Each answer says less about personal flaws and more about the operating system of your life. This matters because we often frame struggles as internal battles, discipline versus laziness, grit versus apathy. But if environments bias decisions through default ease or friction, then our lives unfold partly as a response to those defaults. That realization offers leverage. Once you see the invisible architecture, you get to decide whether to cooperate with it or edit it. And that's the point where the conversation about being stuck shifts from "something must be wrong with me" to "this setup is pushing me here every day." But even after seeing the role of the environment, one challenge remains. Editing surroundings won't answer the hardest dilemma people face. When you meet resistance, how do you know whether to persevere or to walk away? That tension demands a different kind of clarity, because both choices carry risk, and recognizing which path builds growth becomes the next critical question. Perseverance versus quitting, the hard question. Knowing whether to push harder or walk away is one of the most difficult choices anyone makes. Neither path comes without its cost. Staying carries the risk of years dissolving into frustration. Leaving forces you to live with uncertainty and the thought that maybe another few months would have changed everything. This question of perseverance versus quitting doesn't come with universal rules. The evidence is clear that both paths can be wise, but context decides which leads to growth. For years, grit was celebrated as a universal virtue. Stories of those who endured long struggles and emerged successful became cultural models. Yet research now emphasizes that grit only helps when aligned to the right goals. Psychologist Angela Duckworth, who popularized grit, has clarified that effort without direction is not strength, it's waste. She and others point out that grit works best in meaningful endeavors with opportunity for improvement. Persisting indefinitely in situations that lack those conditions does not signal resilience, only misapplied energy. The distinction becomes vivid when effort is measured not by hours or pain, but by progress. Pain alone is deceptive. People often assume the more uncomfortable they feel, the more noble the sacrifice must be, but suffering says very little on its own. Anyone can sit in discomfort without moving forward. The question is whether pain accompanies measurable development. If you're acquiring new skills, building deeper trust, or watching the gap between your current state and your desired outcome shrink, then endurance has meaning. If your effort leaves you standing in the same place month after month, suffering becomes a mask for inertia. This is where researchers advise a simple heuristic: measure progress, not pain. Ask whether the distance between where you are and where you want to be is shrinking over time. If you can chart clear movement across 3 to 6 months, the struggles are part of perseverance. If the markers stay flat, the struggle has hardened into a grinding loop. That diagnostic cuts through the fog of emotion and reframes the decision with evidence rather than pride. The trap many fall into is the sunk cost effect, overvaluing what they've already invested. After years in a relationship or career, leaving feels like admitting the time was wasted. Yet behavioral economists argue the opposite. Sunk costs are already gone, and what matters is what your future gains will be. Past work and experiences can also transfer into new paths. A lawyer who leaves practice for policy isn't abandoning their degree, they're repurposing it. Reframing quitting as reuse rather than dismissal dismantles the guilt tied to sunk costs. Adam Alter, who studies the psychology of being stuck, has described this dilemma as the tension between exploration and exploitation. Exploitation means continuing with what you've already committed to, working a job, sticking with a project, enduring in a relationship. Exploration means testing alternatives and risking short-term instability in the hope of better alignment. Research shows a mix is necessary. Overexploitation leaves you stagnant. Endless exploration prevents stability. Success often comes from knowing when to shift, not from worshipping one side. Consider a streamlined example. 2 graduates start in similar roles. One keeps grinding in a misaligned job for 8 years, convinced endurance shows virtue. The other recognizes after 2 years that the fit is wrong and pivots. The first ends up with years of exhaustion and little fresh growth. The second, though uncertain at first, compounds new skills and finds momentum in a role better matched to their strengths. Research on careers highlights that early pivots often appear like failure in the short term, but lay groundwork for breakthroughs later, the very pattern Alter describes. Another layer comes from how identity shapes perseverance. Some build their self-image around being the type who never quits. That label becomes so central that leaving any pursuit feels like betrayal of self. This rigid identity can trap people even more tightly than external barriers. The cost is not just wasted time, but a narrowing of curiosity and flexibility. By contrast, those who hold a broader identity, valuing adaptability rather than one fixed trait, are freer to shift. They use persistence strategically, not automatically. Flexibility itself becomes the enduring trait. The balance of research cautions against absolute claims. Persistence sometimes unlocks what feels impossible, the illusion of the creative cliff, where people assume they've plateaued just before breakthroughs occur. Other times, quitting is the only rational response to blocked progress. Both grit and surrender hold value in their place. Evidence from psychology, career studies, and behavioral economics all converge on one point: perseverance only pays when it is paired with measurable forward movement. So what does applying this look like in practice? One pragmatic step is to set a progress metric before committing to long endurance. Choose a sign, specific skill growth, tangible feedback, or a measurable outcome to track across 3 to 6 months. Pair it with a clear exit signal. If by the chosen point there is no improvement, treat the situation as structural stuckness, not temporary difficulty. This avoids endless cycles of waiting without change. Having those markers written down creates accountability against self-deception. It is also useful to swap the guiding question. Instead of asking, "Am I tough enough to endure this?" ask, "What will staying add to me in the next 6 months?" That shift reinforces progress as the measure. Strength without gain is self-punishment. Strength with gain is perseverance. Quitting then becomes not weakness, but recognition that endurance without payoff corrupts its own purpose. This framework matters because so many people in 2025 describe feeling trapped in the grind. The instinct is to romanticize endurance or pathologize quitting. But the truth, backed by psychology, is more specific. Endurance becomes perseverance only when challenges reshape you into something greater. Quitting becomes wise when challenges offer only erosion. Each option requires courage, but one requires evidence of growth, while the other demands honesty about its absence. The hardest part is applying this logic not in hindsight, but in the middle of choice. When you're inside the daily grind, it feels safer to cling to identity or sunk costs. That's why setting time-based progress checks is so effective. It creates an external boundary when our inner judgment can't be trusted. Through that structure, perseverance and quitting cease to be moral categories and become strategic ones. When framed this way, the perseverance versus quitting question stops being about personality traits and starts being about context. The goal is not to prove you're strong by enduring anything or prove you're bold by walking away from everything. The goal is to clarify which path brings compounding returns. That clarity is rare, but it's also what separates the grind from real progress. And once you recognize that clarity isn't only an internal battle, but something structured by the systems, environments, and cues around you, another influence comes into view. Beyond personal framing and environmental design, there's a quieter but equally powerful force shaping who keeps going and who gives up: the people standing closest to you. When social circles dictate your path. Why is it that you can go years ignoring something like a marathon, only to find yourself browsing for running shoes the moment several close friends sign up? That shift usually has less to do with exercise itself and more to do with the subtle pull of your circle.